Secondly, copies of Katie and Kendall's books are both going to be available for sale at that back counter. So be sure to stop by there at the end of the event and check those out. Also, please know that this event is being live streamed, as you can see in our iPad over there. Our audience members are not visible on screen on the iPad, but if you don't want to be live on YouTube, just don't walk in front of that, and you'll be fine. And finally, we will have a Q&A at the end of the event, so hold your questions until the end, but definitely have them ready to go. And now for the fun part of the intro. Our moderator tonight, Katie Cotugno.
I will take either.
Okay.
You're very close.
Is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 feminist romance YA novels, including 99 Days and You Say It First. And she is the co-author with Candace Bushnell of Rules for Being a Girl. She is also the author of the adult novel Birds of California, which we have in the back there. And it came out in April, so belated congratulations.
Thank you.
Katie is a Pushcart Prize nominee whose work has appeared in the Iowa Review, the Mississippi Review, and our guesties, as well as many other literary magazines. For undergrad, Katie studied at what is actually my alma mater, Emerson College.
Go Lions.
Go Lions. Notoriously known for its sports, Emerson.
Absolutely.
She was a major in writing, literature, and publishing, and she received an MFA in fiction from Lesley in Cambridge, and now she lives in Boston. Tonight's author, Kendall Kulper, pens award-winning young adult historical fiction with a fantasy twist, including Salt and Storm and Drift and Dagger, both of which were Junior Library Guild selections, and Saltwater Heart, a novella which takes place in the same world. Kendall graduated from Harvard with an honors degree in history and literature. Something I discovered in writing this intro, in addition to being an author, Kendall is also an incredible embroiderer. She's been creating beautiful, intricate, custom artworks, embroidery artwork since 2018, and if you haven't seen her embroidery work, definitely check it out, because I was stunned, personally. It's so gorgeous. But she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts with her husband, 2 daughters, and dog, Abby. And of course, she is the author of Murder for the Modern Girl, which we are all here to celebrate. But you can also look forward to A Starlit Secret to a Sensational Afterlife, which will be out in 2023. To tell you a little bit about Murder for the Modern Girl, it's a historical romance with all the glitz and glam of the Roaring Twenties. A ravishing young mind reader, Ruby, stalks the streets at night in kitten heels, prowling for predatory men to poison. It's a lot of P words there. No one knows her secret until she meets a soft-spoken boy toiling away in the city morgue, desperate to unearth the science behind his gift for shape-shifting. His forensic skills threaten to uncover Ruby's extracurricular activities, we'll call them, and what's worse, Ruby has fallen in love with him. Publishers Weekly lauded this paranormal noir as a glitzy, adrenaline-fueled crime novel brimming with formidable women. I can't wait to hear you talk about it. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Kendall Kulper and Katie Cotugno.
Are these on or they are not on? No,
They are not on.
they are not on. Hi guys, can you hear me now? Are we good? Hi everyone.
Hello.
Ooh, there you go.
We're doing it. I am Katie Cotugno. I write messy, complicated feminist love stories. And I am so honored to be here tonight to celebrate Kendall and Murder for the Modern Girl. I just want to say thank you to Brookline Booksmith for having us. I just love this bookstore. It is just such a warm and incredibly beautiful place, and the renovations have been so amazing, and I'm just very excited to be here with you to celebrate. So first of all, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
Murder for the Modern Girl.
Thank you.
Mackenzie Lee, I think, describes it in her blurb as the most fun book you'll ever read about murder. And I kept thinking about that as I read it. And it really does. It just sort of zings. It's just such a pleasure to read. I know Bonnie told us a little bit about, the nuts and bolts of the book, but do you want to just describe it a little bit more and maybe read a little bit for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to Brookline Booksmith. So Murder for the Modern Girl is my historical fantasy of a mind-reading flapper and a sweet forensic science shapeshifter. And it's kind of about the intersection in this time when forensic science was just being discovered, invented, and murders that had been going undetected were suddenly under the spotlight. So that is kind of the short summary. I'm going to do a short reading from the first chapter of the book, 'cause I think probably most people have not read it yet.
It did just come out today.
It just come out. Some people have inside scoops on copies. Okay. Chapter 1, Ruby, Chicago, December 31st, 1927. Golly, good murder took ages. At this rate, by the time I got out of here, all the best parties would be over. Across the room, one Francis G. Mather, married, wretched father to 5, sat with his arms around 2 women. I'd watched them drink, smoke, and toast to the end of 1927, and now I was absolutely determined Francis Mather would not see the start of 1928. In front of me sat my own smudgy glass, half full. I didn't have to be the daughter of the Cook County State's Attorney to know how colossally idiotic it would be to drink smoke. Might as well go outside and siphon some gasoline from the nearest automobile. It'd be quicker and cheaper and have the same effect. But even if the bartender had offered me a beautiful flute of fizzy golden champagne, chilled and freshly popped, I'd still pass it up, drinking fiddled with the reception. In my pocket, a postage stamp-sized paper sachet of arsenic waited to be dropped into Francis Mather's almost equally poisonous cocktail. It would be so easy to slip it in and walk away, but I had rules. Tips and tricks for a successful murder. Number 1, locate the target. Fellows like Francis Mather weren't hard to come by, but as much as I would have liked to take the business end of my hairpin to every deadbeat in the city, the ones who earned a visit from me had to have something truly evil in mind. In this case, 3 trips to the hospital for Mrs. Mather within a year, followed by a visit from the life insurance man, got people talking, and worrying, and whispering, and that got my attention. Number 2, determine appropriate response. Well, did I have to kill them? No, not always. If the situation called for it, I'd pass tips on to the law, always anonymously, of course, because as far as anyone knew, I was just a barely 18 girl in the city, glamming around parties, only interested in fast cars and fast boys. Number 3, wait for the starting pistol. How could you possibly be sure a person intended to do real terrible harm? How could you snip someone out of existence for a crime they had technically yet to commit? But I am always sure. Ever since I was a kid in knee socks, other people's thoughts have bobbed through the air like pretty baubles floating in a stream. I simply had to reach in and pluck them out. The older I got, the easier it became. I went deeper, under the surface for those bright, flashy fishies, and even all the way down to the mucky bottom, where I could sometimes pry up the deepest, heaviest rocks. Honest, open people had minds as smooth and clear as a mill pond. People who kept secrets had minds walled up tight, riddled with hidden whirlpools that tried to pull me down. Killers had a particular mind too, icy cold, oily slick. And what are we going to do once we get there? One of Francis Mather's girls giggled. Her thoughts came out mushy and muddled and drowned in smoke, but I could read him loud and clear. Tonight, or tomorrow. Tonight's better. Get the money by the end of the week. Rat poison. Sneak it into her hot cocoa. They won't find her until the morning. Tonight or tomorrow. Tonight's better. Starting pistol, and we're off. Hey, bartender, top her up, I said, and the bartender narrowed his eyes at me but sloppily filled my glass. Once I had my smoke, I slipped a hand into my pocket for the paper sachet and slid back on my stool. I stumbled a little, cursing, swaying. Just as I passed Francis Mather's table, my foot caught the ankle of companion number 1, and my glass of liquor went flying, hair to hemline, down the front of companion number 2. Watch your bony feet, I shouted, while number 2 let out a screech like a cat and jumped up. My dress! You ruined my dress! Blame her and those Clydesdale stompers. I'll call you a Clydesdale. Girls, girls! The bartender whipped out between us, more worried about what 3 hellcats could do to his collection of glassware than what we do to each other. So I brayed, I'm leavin', you can have this stinkin' hole, before retreating out to the street. 10 minutes later, I traded the scuffy shoes, oily wig, and sad putty pancake hat for a smear of coal over my eyes. and a cupid's pout on my lips. After giving my red curls a good fluff, I stepped back into the street, my heels snapping on the pavement. I didn't need to stick around to see the end. Acute alcohol poisoning would be the official report. Hell, at the rate Mather had been drinking, maybe the arsenic wasn't even necessary. Quite literally overkill, but I didn't bother with chance. In my experience, the wicked tended to be inordinately luckier than the innocent, which was exactly what made this work so satisfying. As I tucked my favorite pin into my curls and made a beeline for the taxi stand on Ashland, I felt the weight of Francis Mather lift from the world, turning everything lighter and brighter, including me. I couldn't help dancing down the sidewalk, knowing I looked perfect for tonight's party, fresh and pretty and glowing with a mysterious kind of something that would send the fellas gathering like moths to a candle. I grinned. Honestly, murder worked better than mascara.
Thank you, Kendall. I just, again, love this book so much. One of the things that I loved most about it and that sort of stuck out to me from the very first read, and that I think that you just kind of illustrated, is how strong Ruby's voice is. So I'm curious if that is the place that you started from, when like you were first starting to come to this book. If you knew who she was from the very beginning, or if she kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, so it's funny because this book started out written in third person. So there kind of was no voice at all, but once I was committed to doing a dual narrator, so the book is half narrated by Ruby, who you just heard, and then the other half is narrated by Guy, who's a forensic scientist. I really wanted the two chapters to have really distinct voices. So I like books where you can open it to any random page and you know who's speaking just based on the voice. So that was something that ended up being refined more and more and more as I went through more edits and I got to know the characters a bit better. And to me, voice is really fun to read, but it's a really great tool for seeing how your character views the world. And for Ruby, everything is really fun and it's flashy and it's interesting and she's curious. And for Guy, he's very timid and he sort of looks at everything from a couple steps back, and he's very intellectual, he's very interested in science, and so if he can access something through that viewpoint, it opens up to him and he gets more interested and warmer to it. And those kinds of things, like I said, they're really, really fun to write because I can throw in the slang, even though I always hear people are like, the slang is too much.
Oh
like,
my god, no, I loved the slang. It was fantastic, I thought.
Yeah. So those things are just, they're, like I said, they're really fun, but for me, they're just great tools for figuring out exactly who these characters really are.
Absolutely. I'm interested, so you said that you started the book originally in third person, like what led to the evolution to doing a dual point of view, first person narrative?
I think, I wanted it to feel more intimate, like you were really in these people's heads, and like I said, I wanted the chapters to feel really distinct, and having it narrated from their individual perspectives was definitely an easy way to do that. And then the dual narrators are always it's always tricky. I don't know. Have you ever tried to do a dual?
I had, yeah. Birth California is actually
oh, there you go. Yeah,
back and forth.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you also had this experience, but when I sat down to write a dual narrator book for the first time, I approached it the way that I had written all my previous novels, which were only from one person's point of view. And I got to what I thought was only like a quarter of the story and realized that my word count was already like 3/4 of the novel, and you realize like, oh, I have half the amount of space to tell a full character arc, and you have to start like, okay, like no more backstory, like no more like childhood trauma, everything's just gonna go like straight to the present. And it's a practical challenge that even with this second book that I am working on right now, you would think I would have figured it out having written one, but I had the exact same problem. I got like a couple chapters in and I was like, oh, we are really moving along. We need to cut everything back.
I think it's in the flap copy of for Murder for the Modern Girl that you sort of describe the kind of books you write as historical with a magical twist. Has that always been your aesthetic and the kinds of stories that you're interested in telling?
I think it has now, because those are the only books that I seem to be able to get published. But I think I studied history in college and I really loved it. I think if you are interested in world building, history makes it really easy for you because there's already a world to build off of. And I find it so fascinating to research and get caught up in the research, and especially if the writing is not going so well sometimes, you're like, let me see what random fact I can spend the next 3 hours looking into. And I think the fantasy aspect for me allows me to talk about sometimes really difficult subjects, sometimes just kind of unique subjects in a way that is not exactly head on, but sort of approaching it at an angle, which I think makes it a bit more manageable sometimes for readers to address. So, for example, Ruby has her mind reading, Guy has his shape shifting, and Guy's relationship with his ability is very antagonistic. It's something that he's really afraid of, that he feels like he can't control, that he feels like alienates him from society, from being able to form relationships. And I think teenagers especially, but kind of all people, have something that they feel like is different about them, that they can't control, that they have to, push away. And his journey is figuring out, this thing that I thought alienated me from people is actually what brings me closer to people. And that is something that certainly I have learned in my own life, and again, I feel like it's something that is really, applicable to a lot of teenagers. But, if you write a book that is about that issue, certainly those books are incredibly valuable, but you might have a kid that doesn't even know that that is an issue they're struggling with and would feel anxious about picking up a book that is about such a heavy topic.
Sure.
But they would pick up a fun fantasy book.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a way to talk about these subjects without, making them feel a bit more abstract and so a bit more applicable to your own life.
You touched on it a little bit just now, but a thing that I wanted to ask you about was research. There are a lot of moving parts in this book, right? Like there's the Jazz Age setting, there is the scientific investigation that's happening in the forensic lab, there's like the intricacies of corruption in Prohibition-era Chicago. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your process was like for just kind of gathering and synthesizing all that information and molding it into something that really does feel so seamless and like the narrative is just so strong.
Yeah, well, like I said, I love research. History was my major in college, and so always my first thing. Well, first the book started with a nonfiction book that I had read that was about the birth of forensic science. It's called the Poisoner's Handbook. It's probably somewhere in this bookstore right now. Not that I'm pushing people to buy books other than mine at my own book event, but if you are going to buy 2 books tonight or 3 books tonight,
thanks, Kendall.
the Poisoner's Handbook should be your third. It's great. It's like I said, it's nonfiction, but it reads like a really zippy fiction account, and it's about Jazz Age and science and murder and mystery, and it's in New York City. And so that was really my jumping off point for thinking, if I set a book that covers these subjects set in 1920, how would I make it my own?
Mm-hmm.
And so Chicago is a city where I have lived for a couple years, and it has such a great 1920s history of its own, full of corruption and craziness. And so that was how I decided on Chicago, and then it was just lots and lots of books. And because I live in Cambridge and because I graduated from Harvard, I was able to get my Harvard library card.
Amazing.
Which the Harvard Library is like a palace.
Do they have a lot of books there, Kendall?
It is second only to the Library of Congress. I have learned they can get like any book in the world. So I just went with like a huge stack of all the books I could find about Chicago and murder and science and all these things, and I just read and read and read and read and read. And then I like to sort of read as much as possible before I get into a book, and then kind of push the books away, because most readers are not going to be coming in with the knowledge of having just read like 30 books about this subject. They're going to, you know, come in with the most basic understanding of these things. So you never want a history book to feel like a textbook, and sometimes it's really hard because you spend so much time researching something and you just want to shove everything in, and that's when you have nice beta readers and nice editors who are like, I don't think we need like 3 pages describing the Chicago political system and how aldermen are voted in and how this one got kicked out for corruption. And
fair. I mean, I'm interested in those things, but I understand.
So, but yeah, I mean, I love it. I think it's so fun, and there are so many details that I never could have come up with on my own, and just, I think having something real to rely on gives me the confidence to write something that feels really fully developed.
Yeah. One thing I couldn't help but notice about the book was how, forgive me, modern it felt. Just in terms of like the social issues that you're commenting on, particularly in the way that like some of the characters feel like systems have failed them. They're, you know, not the right kinds of victims. So the police are not particularly interested in investigating crimes that are committed against them. The government is sort of useless and filled with corruption. I just was wondering if it was a conscious decision on your part, or is that just sort of like the nature of our society that a book set 100 years ago feels so relevant today?
Yeah, it's a bit depressing that a book that's set in 1928 feels so relevant to 2022. But yeah, I mean, I wrote this book in the aftermath of the 2016 election, and definitely felt, you know, as a woman, and you know, we all were there. We know what it was like.
Sure.
It was not great. And I really wanted to create a character that took power into her own hands, and I feel like I always have to add an asterisk, which is do not murder people.
Don't do a murder.
Even though it's in the title, even though that's the majority of the book, don't murder people unless you happen to be a mind reader with a, you know, sophisticated understanding of the justice system. But yeah, I sort of felt like I was just so tired of seeing particularly young women misunderstood and underestimated, and I wanted to create a character that took that perception and twisted it, and was able to find power in being overlooked and seen as not a threat. And that was definitely where it all started, and then, you know, you always sort of pull from a little from history and a little from modern times, because, you know, I wrote this book in 2016, 2017, 2018, and all those issues were forefront on my mind for sure. So, but, you know, the nice thing about setting a book in 1928 is that the things that she was fighting for, improvements in the justice system and more representation for women, and, you know, a legal system that actually did start to treat vulnerable people as worthy victims, those things truly did start to happen. There really were organizations that began to set up to address those issues, and so it was nice to have that real historical example that I could say, like,
You can kind of zoom out.
Yeah, and it sort of, it allowed me to access a moment of hope and victory in the story that had a real world counterpoint. My current project is set in 1934 Hollywood, so I not to like totally switch tacks, but it's been very forefront on my mind that the issues that those characters were facing in 1934, we are still dealing with. And I never really appreciated those real world moments of victory until I was writing a story where there were no real world moments of victory. There was no, sweeping change.
Do you want to just talk a little bit more about your? I was going to ask you
Sure,
what
sure,
is next
sure.
for you anyway. So do you want to talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just have a new title as of like 2 days ago. And it has not been officially announced yet, but I have the green light to talk about it now. It's called A Starlet's Secret to a Sensational Afterlife.
I love that.
And it is slightly related to Murder for the Modern Girl. It's not a sequel, but they're set in the same world, and it follows one of Ruby's younger sisters, and she decides to go to Hollywood to become a star. And it has been so much fun to write, but like I said, it's been a challenge because if you go into 1934 Hollywood, you are only going to find the most depressing stories
Sure.
of exploitation and abuse, and even there's nobody that had a good life in Hollywood in the 1930s.
Sure.
And even the people that made it, that had reached their dreams, just had disaster at every turn.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest challenge, because I don't want to write a book that is depressing.
Sure.
And I don't want to live in a book that is depressing. And it wasn't until I sort of said to myself, okay, well, I have this world that is depressing and this huge challenge, and I wrote the bulk of this book last winter, which was not a joyful time for
Sure.
many of us. So I kind of decided that if I was going to have something that was this bleak, I needed a character that was able to challenge that.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up creating this character, Henrietta, that to me, she is just like a fireworks of joy. She is just so out to live her life, and she sees horrible things happen, but she does not let them break whatever is inside of her that keeps her going. And I have a banner that's hanging on my wall that I bought during the pandemic and during the summer of 2020, and it says, "Joy is an act of rebellion." And that is this character to a T, that she sees all this darkness that is trying to tear down things and people that she loves, and instead of it turning her really cynical and dark, she decides that she is going to go out and live the best possible life she can. And just being able to live in that head, for me as a human, has been really helpful and beneficial. It's been a great, it's not my natural way to view the world, I would say, and sort of forcing myself to see things so positively.
Yeah, what a great person to spend your days with.
Yes, she has been great. I mean, it's also a dual narrator, so the male narrator is very cynical and has a very dark side. So it's kind of a bit of those two sides kind of coming together, and but it has just been the most fun book to write. I'm so close to having it back off to my editor, and
That's an exciting feeling.
Oh, yeah.
The last thing I want to ask you about is your embroidery. When I went on your website, I just really loved that you described yourself like equally as an author and an artist, and that those things have equal weight in the way that you see yourself and sort of present yourself to the world. So I was just wondering, I was curious about the ways that those two sides of yourself and what you do sort of inform each other, if they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so helpful as a writer to have something that's really creative, and especially something that does not involve words, like thinking.
Something really tactile.
Yes, exactly. So I've always kind of like loved those little hobbies, and for embroidery, you know, it's really just like the craziest thing. It was not ever something that I was interested in, but when my younger daughter was born, she was inheriting so much from her older sister that I was like, I want her to have something that is just hers. So in like a fit of like nesting when I was super pregnant, I was like, I see people on Instagram and somebody made some beautiful floral monogram, and I was like, I'm gonna make that for my kid. So I went out, I bought all the supplies, they're all the wrong supplies, I now know, and just made this monogram for my daughter and put it up online, and, you know, a friend saw it, she wanted one for her kids, and then somebody else saw it, wanted one for her kids, and then one of my other friends had a baby, and I was like, oh, for her baby shower, I'll make her a portrait of her dog. I've never done that before, but I could probably figure it out. And then, you know, it just sort of, again, like somebody from her baby shower saw it and wanted one for her own, and it's so nice that it's a creative hobby that's so different from writing, and writing just, it takes so long. I mean, like, you know, but like, I came up with this idea in 2015, and it's 2017, and we're sitting here, and like, now I finally get to show it to everybody. And with embroidery, it's like I come up with something, and then 2 weeks later I put it on Instagram, and you know, the pet portrait embroidery community is so nice. So it's like when like I'm feeling like needy, like all artists are, and I just want people to like shower me in compliments. It's like a nice sort of like a dopamine hit of like I can just put something on Instagram, and then people are like, oh, this
Watch
is great.
those likes roll in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really nice, you know, like writing it can be so hard to feel validated.
It's also so solitary. Like, I feel like there's not I mean, like, obviously there is like an online writing community, but it's not
the same.
No, it's not the same.
Yeah. So it's a really nice thing to do. It's nice like to just kind of have it as like a creative hobby. It's nice. My relationship to it is so much. Like I trust myself so much more with embroidery. Like with writing, it's a lot of like second guessing, and I don't know. And with embroidery, I'm always like, it's gonna be fine. I don't know how it's gonna be fine. Just do it. It's gonna be fun, and it's always fine. And it's just nice to have something, you know. If I wasn't doing embroidery, it would be some other fun hobby, and it's just, it's funny that embroidery is just the one that has taken off.
I love that. That's fantastic. Kendall, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for all of these guys to get to read the book. I truly enjoyed it so much. Questions from you guys. It's always hard to be first, but somebody has to be first.
Or we'll just all sit and stare at you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you want to?
No, go ahead. I'm not
All right.
going to jump in.
Hi. Which process was longer, the writing or the editing stages?
Okay, let me think. So this book had a long journey. I wrote from 2016 is kind of when I really first sat down and did it. And then I went through some edits with my agent, and then some edits with my editor. So, oh, geez, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't even know. Probably the editing. I think so. I know for the book that I'm working on right now had a much more compressed timeline, because anytime you write something with a contract, it's always so much faster than when you're like You know, when you don't have a contract, you're like, I wrote 1,000 words today. That's a good day's work. I'm just gonna sit back and go for a nice walk. And when you have a book under contract, you're like, oh my god, like looking at like the watch, like. So, definitely for this book that I'm working on right now, the editing is a much longer process because I was not given that much time to write the book, which I don't really like to do. But it all worked out. It was fine.
In the back.
What about, tell us about the 1920s Chicago, that, you know, you incorporated into the book that sort of, matches with our thinking about that time. You know, the gangsters and the prohibition and America on the rise and all that.
Yeah, well, I watched the Ken Burns documentary on Prohibition. That was great. And
I haven't done that one. I should do that one.
it's great if you have like 12 hours to spare.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, Chicago politics is fascinating and wild, and I think any fictionalized account of Chicago politics is never as crazy as the actual thing. So for people that aren't aware, if you read the book, you will find out that Chicago operates under an alderman system, which, let's see if I can remember it. I think it's 50 neighborhoods, and basically, like the city is broken up into these 50 wards, and there's an alderman that's the head of every ward. And definitely in the 1920s, and even still a little bit now, the aldermen are crazy, and they basically rule these neighborhoods like little kings. And you know, if you want to do anything in those neighborhoods, you kind of have to give a little kickback to the aldermen, and a lot of these positions are sort of inherited, even though they're elected. And of course, Chicago has, or certainly in the 1920s, had a huge mob connection, which there is a little bit in this book. And just everything that you can possibly imagine happening in politics, and even some things you can't imagine, have probably happened in Chicago. And yeah, so that was something that was a difficult topic to figure out how to address, because it's not really, you know, she is not a part of this system. Neither of these characters really are. But her father is the Cooks County State Attorney, which is basically the Chicago DA, and he gets embroiled in this situation where he's sort of the only non-morally corrupt politician in Chicago, and he's being targeted because he's starting to go after some of these corrupt guys. So I had to do some research, but it was another one of those things where, even though I find it very interesting, it was something that really takes away from the core of the story, which is about this girl and this guy and their journeys with each other. And you know, unfortunately, it was not a book about Chicago politics.
But I feel like you write about it with such authority that, like, even when you're not, you know, like, reciting facts about the aldermen, like, we feel confident in the, like, you've built the world so beautifully that, like, we feel very confident and very, like, secure in your hands.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I tried to give as much information as would be necessary to the story and add some color, and hopefully if you're interested, you can go out and find those crazy stories on your own.
Anybody else?
Yeah. So when you're writing, do you know the whole trajectory of the book, or are there points that you're kind of making a left-hand turn and figuring it out as you go?
It definitely depends. With this book, I had a very clear final destination, which I have spoiled it so many times. I'm not going to get specifics, but it is happy. It is a happy ending, and you know, when I wrote this book, everything was so depressing. I was like, I am gonna make this the happiest freaking ending I can possibly imagine. It's like, you know, on a beach, and it's romantic, and there's a little dog, and like everything is just like, I just wanted it to feel like you just got on a rocket ship and it's like so joyful and so happy. So I always had that destination in my mind, and then getting there, really, it took a lot of twists and turns. And there's a metaphor some people have described, like driving in the dark with headlights on. So I always knew my destination, and I always knew what was coming up a little bit ahead, but not really, anything in the distance. Which is how I've written all of my books. But it's interesting with this Hollywood book. It was the first time that I knew, like, beat by beat, everything that I was writing, because when I sold the book to my publisher, I had to write a detailed synopsis. So I really do not enjoy doing that. I don't like having to sit out and plan my books, because I feel like it just boxes me in. But unfortunately, publishers don't accept, like, and then some other things happen, and I'm not really sure how we're gonna get from here to here, but it's probably gonna be, like, good, so just trust me. So I had to really write out, like, everything that happened, and wouldn't you know it, when I sat down to write the book, I was like, wow, this is so easy.
Outlines are amazing.
I already know everything that's going to happen.
So it did make the experience of drafting smoother for you?
It's so much easier.
Yeah.
So much easier. I was like, wow, all those people that are like, outlines are so good, and I was always like, you are nerds. They actually were onto something.
Yeah.
So maybe in the future I'll have to consider it. But yeah, so I enjoy the surprise of when you're writing and things come up, which things did come up with this Hollywood book. That was fun. But it was nice to have some idea of what was coming up next.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm back. Where do you get your ideas? Do you come up with them, or does the publisher say, we'd like a book set in Chicago during the Prohibition days, or are you just pulling them in and putting those general ideas out in front of the publisher and they say that way? Give me a detailed one on that.
Kind of neither of those. It would be nice if a publisher just came to me and was like, we're going to give you lots of money to write a book, and it's going to be exactly this, and we're going to be happy with it. That would be nice. No, the big advice for writing anything is to write what you are interested in. So don't try to anticipate what readers are going to want or what publishers are going to want. I was interested in this story set in the 1920s about this girl, and it was something that really fired me up and got me really excited. And this book took a really long time to find a publisher, so long that I thought it was never going to happen. And it's just, you can never really guess how those things will happen. My first book sold in 3 weeks, and this book was on submission for, I think, over a year. And I had to give credit to my agent, because I even did not think that it was on submission anymore until anytime you get an email from your agent that says, can I call you in 5 minutes? It's like, okay, things are happening. So that was just the greatest. And with this Hollywood book, I never really do this, but when I was writing this book, I started to think, like, oh, she has little sisters, and when her little sisters are 18, it's going to be the 1930s, and how fun would it be to write a book set in Hollywood in the 1930s? There's just so much there. So even before this book was sold, even when I thought that it probably was never going to sell, I was starting to write this Hollywood book, because I just thought the topic was so interesting. And thankfully, the book did sell, and thankfully my publisher, I sort of was like, how would you feel about a book set in Hollywood in the 1930s? And they're like, okay, tell us more. And so, I think if my publisher had said, we like the idea of another book, but instead of Hollywood in the 1930s, how about Europe in the 1930s? I would maybe be like, I don't know about that.
I would be interested in that book from you too, FYI.
Well, maybe someday. But yeah, I think if you have a good editor and a good publisher, they know when to sort of push you in a direction and when to sort of say like, well, we want you to write the story that you want to tell,
Yeah.
not the story that we want to hear. So I feel very fortunate that my editor and my publisher have been supportive of this book and then the next book too.
Anything else? We have time for I think one or two more. Annie Cardi.
So you said Ruby has sisters. Will we be getting maybe a third sister book? If so, where would that be set? Dream historical.
That's a great
environment,
question.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, so she has two little sisters who are twins. And it's so funny, you know, these characters that I'm sure I just threw in there, like, she could have had, like, a, you know, 8-year-old brother, but instead she had 12-year-old twin sisters.
Convenient.
Convenient, yeah. So, yeah, she has another twin sister, and there is another story sort of brewing in the back of my mind. So everybody buy this book and the next book, so that my publisher wants maybe a third book. The character, so Henrietta is the one twin sister, Genevieve is the other twin sister. They are Henny and Jenny. Those are their like cute little twin names. Where Henny is just this fireworks of joy, Jenny is like sort of like Aubrey Plaza's character in Parks and Rec. She's like sort of a human cat personified, and if I did write this story, the male character would be a golden retriever personified. And I haven't quite decided, because I still don't know how likely this story is going to be, but I do know that the World's Fair was in Chicago in 1934, and there are just so many cool, wild things going on at that World's Fair. Lots of like, the future is now, and yeah. So I have been thinking about it, thinking about what her sort of magical ability would be, and yeah, just like a lot of things sort of swirling in the back of my mind. But
That's my favorite part, almost. Like before you put pen to paper, when it's like all just conjecture in the back of your mind, it's like, to me at least, so deeply pleasurable.
yes, and also terrifying.
Sure, that too.
But yeah, so like I said, buy this book, tell everybody about this book so that I can figure out if it's at the World's Fair or somewhere else.
Guys, thank you. Thank you to the Brookline Booksmith for having us. And Kendall, thank you and congratulations
Thank you.
on Murder for the Modern Girl.